The first thing I heard as security walked me through the office wasn't an apology. It was laughter. Not loud enough to be called cruel, just quiet enough to pretend it wasn't. I kept my eyes forward anyway. At 28, I'd spent 4 years building reporting systems that saved the company millions, but none of that seemed to matter on April 14th when my access badge stopped working at exactly 3:12 p.m. My manager stood near the conference room pretending to look uncomfortable. The coworkers who used to ask for my help suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Security handed me a cardboard box and suggested I collect my belongings quickly. I thanked them, packed my desk, and left without arguing. What nobody knew was that the termination meeting had surprised me for only about 30 seconds. The real surprise had happened 3 weeks earlier when an internal audit request landed in my inbox by mistake. I hadn't said a word about it. I hadn't confronted anyone. I hadn't even hinted that I knew what was coming. So while my team watched me leave and quietly celebrated the end of my career, a sealed folder was already making its way toward the CEO's desk. And inside that folder was a name he wouldn't be expecting to see: mine. My name is Claire Morgan, and until that afternoon, I was a senior operations analyst for one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in Chicago. On paper, my career looked stable. I consistently exceeded performance targets, trained new hires, and handled projects that crossed multiple departments. But 6 months before I was escorted out, everything started changing after my manager, Derek Lawson, hired a new analyst named Melissa. She was friendly, ambitious, and quickly became the favorite person in every meeting Derek attended. First, I ignored it. Favoritism exists in almost every workplace. Then my reports started appearing in presentations without my name attached. My recommendations were repeated by Melissa and suddenly praised as brilliant. When I politely raised concerns, Derek smiled and told me I needed to be more of a team player. The message was clear: stay quiet. So I did. I documented everything instead. Every forwarded email, every version history, every meeting invitation, every project timeline. Meanwhile, rumors started spreading that the company was restructuring and certain positions might disappear. Strangely, those rumors always seemed to point toward me. By early April, coworkers stopped including me in planning meetings. My responsibilities quietly shifted elsewhere. Everyone acted as if my departure had already been decided. The only person who seemed unaware of the plan was the CEO. By the second week of April, the atmosphere around me had become almost rehearsed. Conversations stopped when I entered break rooms. Project meetings were rescheduled without notifying me. Requests that had always come directly to my inbox were suddenly routed through Melissa instead. What made the situation strange wasn't the exclusion itself. It was how coordinated it felt. On April 9th, I arrived at work and found that Melissa had already been added to 3 of my long-term operational initiatives. When I checked the project management system, her permissions had been elevated overnight. Mine had been reduced. No explanation. No discussion. Just a quiet adjustment. At 10:14 a.m., I received an email from Derek titled, "Resource Alignment." The message claimed leadership was reorganizing responsibilities to improve efficiency. Attached was a spreadsheet showing nearly 70% of my workload reassigned to Melissa. I stared at the document for a long moment before saving a copy to my personal records folder. The next few days revealed even more. On April 10th, a client called asking why Melissa was presenting herself as the lead architect of a reporting platform I had spent 14 months developing. I answered professionally, explained the transition, and ended the call. Then I documented it. On April 11th, an internal planning meeting took place without me despite the fact that every agenda item involved systems I had personally built. One attendee accidentally forwarded me the meeting notes afterward. Melissa was listed as the creator of 3 separate initiatives. My name appeared nowhere. I wasn't angry, at least not outwardly. I was observing. Patterns matter more than emotions when people start rewriting history. The most revealing moment happened on April 12th. Around 4:40 p.m., an email arrived from internal audit. The message wasn't intended for me. I knew that immediately because the subject line referenced an executive review committee. Attached was a preliminary compliance summary. Most employees would have deleted it. I opened it. Inside were questions regarding project ownership, budget reporting, vendor approvals, and operational risk controls. Several projects listed Melissa as lead despite records indicating she had joined the company months after development began. My name appeared repeatedly in supporting documentation. Someone noticed the discrepancies. 5 minutes later, the sender recalled the email. Too late. I'd already read it. More importantly, I'd already understood what it meant. An audit wasn't investigating me. It was investigating the gap between documented facts and public claims. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing records I'd quietly collected over 6 months. Emails, version histories, approval chains, calendar invitations, meeting transcripts, client acknowledgments. None of it looked dramatic. No smoking gun. Just thousands of small details forming a larger picture. A picture showing exactly who had done the work and who had taken credit for it. The following Monday, April 14th, everything accelerated. At 9:03 a.m., HR placed a meeting on my calendar labeled Organizational Discussion. At 11:30 a.m., Melissa appeared unusually cheerful. By noon, several coworkers avoided eye contact entirely. At 2:47 p.m., Derek asked me to join him and an HR representative in Conference Room B. The conversation lasted 8 minutes. The company was moving in a different direction. My position had been eliminated. They appreciated my contributions. A severance packet slid across the table. Derek avoided looking directly at me. HR recited prepared language from a document she clearly didn't write. I signed nothing. I simply thanked them for the information. 25 minutes later, security arrived. And while my team quietly enjoyed the spectacle of watching me leave, none of them knew that the Executive Audit Committee was scheduled to deliver its findings the very next morning. Nor did they know that one folder inside that report carried a label that would soon make the entire leadership team very uncomfortable. Project Ownership Review, Claire Morgan. The morning after my termination, I woke up at 6:15 a.m. out of habit, even though I no longer had an office to go to. For the first time in years, my calendar was empty. No meetings. No deadlines. No status calls. Just silence. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and reviewed the notes I had organized the night before. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I wasn't planning a lawsuit. I simply wanted a complete record of events while everything was still fresh in my mind. At 8:22 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from a former coworker named Rachel. We weren't particularly close, but she was one of the few people in the department who still treated people fairly. Her text contained only 7 words. Something big is happening upstairs today. I thanked her and went back to my morning. 36 minutes later, she sent another message. This time there was a photo. The image showed executive leadership entering the boardroom on the 23rd floor. The CEO, Victor Hale, was among them. So was the CFO. So was the head of internal audit. The meeting wasn't on any public company calendar. Whatever was happening, it wasn't routine. Around noon, Rachel called. Her voice sounded nervous. Claire, I probably shouldn't tell you this, she said. Then don't, I replied. There was a brief silence. The CEO just stopped a presentation halfway through. That got my attention. Victor Hale had a reputation for being patient, methodical, and impossible to impress. Interrupting executives wasn't his style. Why? I asked. Rachel lowered her voice. Apparently someone opened a file from the audit report. I didn't respond immediately. And she exhaled. Your name was on it. After the call ended, I stared out my apartment window for several minutes. The reaction didn't surprise me. The timing did. Internal investigations usually moved slowly. Executive reviews moved even slower. Yet somehow, less than 24 hours after my termination, leadership was already discussing documentation connected to my work. By late afternoon, more information started filtering through unofficial channels. A senior director had been asked to provide project records. Finance had requested historical approval logs. 2 department heads were suddenly unavailable for meetings. Most interesting of all, Melissa's afternoon presentation had been canceled without explanation. The next morning, another message arrived from Rachel. This one was longer. During the executive review, internal audit had presented a side-by-side comparison of project ownership claims versus documented records, email chains, development histories, approval signatures. budget authorizations, client communications. The evidence wasn't emotional. It was administrative, which made it difficult to argue against. According to the report, multiple major initiatives credited to Melissa had been substantially designed, implemented, and maintained by me long before she joined the company. Several performance summaries submitted by Derek contained descriptions that didn't match system records. Revenue impact estimates attributed to his leadership team traced directly back to models I had built. The deeper auditors looked, the more inconsistencies appeared. Then came the moment Rachel said changed the entire room. During the presentation, one executive reportedly remarked that Melissa's promotion path seemed unusually fast given her documented contributions. Another executive attempted to defend the decision. That's when internal audit opened a supporting folder. Inside were timestamped records, archived drafts, approval chains, and project histories. Hundreds of pages. The room went quiet. Then Victor Hale asked a simple question. Who approved Claire Morgan's termination? Nobody answered immediately. According to Rachel, that silence lasted longer than anyone felt comfortable with. By Friday afternoon, rumors spread throughout the company. Employees who had ignored me for months were suddenly searching old emails. Managers were reviewing project histories. Directors were requesting documentation. Nobody knew exactly what would happen next. But everyone understood the same thing. The story leadership had been told about my performance was beginning to collapse. And the person opening those records wasn't HR. It wasn't Derek. It wasn't Melissa. It was the CEO himself. By the following Monday, the situation inside the company had shifted from rumor to concern. What started as quiet conversations in hallways had become formal requests for documentation. Former coworkers who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly appeared in my inbox with carefully worded messages asking how I was doing. A few even apologized for how things had unfolded. I responded politely but briefly. There was nothing to gain from revisiting old conversations. The facts were already doing the work. At 9:41 a.m., I received an unexpected phone call from an executive assistant in the CEO's office. She introduced herself, verified my identity, and asked whether I would be available for a meeting later that week. Her tone was professional, but there was a noticeable difference from the way HR had spoken to me days earlier. This wasn't damage control. It sounded more like information gathering. I agreed. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning at the company's headquarters. After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes. The same building that had escorted me out with security now wanted me back inside. Thursday arrived with cold rain and heavy traffic. When I entered the lobby, nobody stopped me. Nobody questioned why I was there. In fact, the receptionist immediately handed me a visitor badge and informed the CEO's office that I had arrived. The contrast wasn't lost on me. For days earlier, security had watched me carry a cardboard box through those same doors. Now an executive assistant escorted me to the top floor. The boardroom looked exactly as I remembered. Polished wood table, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the skyline stretching across the horizon. Victor Hale entered a few moments later. He shook my hand, thanked me for coming, and sat across from me. There were no lawyers present. No HR representatives. No managers. Just the CEO and the head of internal audit. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. They asked specific questions about project development timelines, reporting systems, client implementations, and leadership structures. They already knew most of the answers. The questions weren't designed to challenge me. They were designed to verify records. Several times, internal audit referenced documents I recognized immediately. Version histories, approval logs, archived emails. Every record told the same story. The work had been completed by me. The credit had been distributed elsewhere. Near the end of the meeting, Victor opened a thick folder resting beside him. The cover contained a label I couldn't fully read from across the table. He turned several pages and then looked directly at me. "Do you know what surprised me most?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not the documentation." He paused. "The fact that you never complained." I considered the question carefully before answering. Documentation lasts longer than arguments. For the first time during the meeting, he smiled. The head of internal audit nodded. A few moments later, Victor shared information I hadn't expected. Multiple executives were under review. Derek's department had become a primary focus of the investigation. Promotion recommendations were being reassessed. Performance evaluations were being audited. The review had expanded far beyond a single termination decision. What began as project ownership questions had exposed broader concerns about leadership practices. Then he said something that explained everything. The original audit had not started because of me. It had started because a major client questioned conflicting information during a contract renewal discussion. One inconsistency led to another. Eventually, auditors started following documentation trails. Those trails repeatedly led back to my work. Before the meeting ended, Victor closed the folder and thanked me again for my professionalism. He made no promises, offered no guarantees. Yet as I stood to leave, he added one final sentence. "Claire, there are some people in this company who owe you answers." I thanked him and walked toward the elevator. What I didn't know then was that those answers were coming much sooner than anyone expected. The next executive meeting was already scheduled, and several careers were about to change direction permanently. The executive meeting took place the following Tuesday, and by noon, news was spreading through the company faster than any official announcement could contain it. Rachel called me during her lunch break. The moment I answered, I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "It's happening," she said. "What is?" I asked calmly, though I already suspected the answer. "Everything." She lowered her voice. "Derek is gone." I remained silent. Not reassigned. Not transferred. Gone. According to Rachel, the executive review had concluded that multiple performance reports contained misleading representations of project ownership and contribution records. Several promotion recommendations had relied on inaccurate information. Internal audit's findings left little room for interpretation. Leadership could debate opinions, but they couldn't debate timestamps, approval logs, or archived records. Derek's resignation was announced before noon. Melissa's situation unfolded differently. Her promotion was immediately suspended pending review. Investigators determined that while she had benefited from the system, much of the documentation suggested she wasn't the primary architect behind it. The spotlight returned to the people responsible for approving and presenting the information. By Wednesday morning, employees received a company-wide email from the CEO. It discussed accountability, transparency, and organizational trust. Most people understood exactly what it meant. The company wasn't simply correcting a personnel issue. It was acknowledging a leadership failure. Then around 3:15 p.m. my phone rang. Victor Hale's office again. This time the conversation was brief. He asked whether I would be willing to return for another meeting. I agreed. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the same boardroom where executives had spent weeks examining records connected to my work. Victor entered carrying the same folder that had caused so much disruption. He placed it on the table between us and opened it. Inside was a formal offer. The company wanted me back. Not in my previous role. A newly created position. Director of Operational Strategy. The role would oversee multiple departments, report directly to senior leadership, and include authority over the systems I had originally built. For several seconds I simply looked at the document. Not because I was shocked. Because I was remembering the moment security had escorted me out of the building less than 2 weeks earlier. Victor noticed my expression. "You don't have to answer today," he said. I appreciated that. Most people assume victory feels explosive. It rarely does. Real vindication is usually quiet. It's sitting across from the same organization that underestimated you and realizing they finally understand your value. After reviewing the offer carefully, I accepted. My first day back looked very different from my last day leaving. Nobody laughed. Nobody avoided eye contact. Nobody whispered when I entered a room. The people who had once treated me as invisible suddenly seemed eager to listen. But the most satisfying moment happened a month later. During a leadership presentation, one of the new executives displayed a slide highlighting the company's most successful operational initiatives. My name appeared beside every major project I had spent years building. No corrections. No missing credits. No rewritten history. Just facts. After the meeting ended, I gathered my notes and prepared to leave. Several employees stopped me to offer congratulations. One of them quietly admitted that she had wanted to speak up months earlier but feared the consequences. I understood. Workplace pressure has a way of convincing good people to stay silent. Before I walked away, I told her something I had learned through the entire experience. Silence isn't weakness, I said. The question is what you're doing while you're silent. She nodded thoughtfully. And as I stepped into the elevator, I realized the people who laughed when security escorted me out had taught me something valuable. They believed power belonged to whoever controlled the room. They were wrong. Real power belonged to the person who understood the truth, documented it carefully, and waited for the right moment to let it speak for itself. 3 months after returning to the company, I walked past the conference room where my termination meeting had taken place. The table was the same. The chairs were the same. Even the clock on the wall hadn't changed. But everything else had. The people who once decided my future were gone. The assumptions they built their decisions on had collapsed under the weight of documented facts. Looking back, the most important lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about patience. People often think justice arrives through confrontation, dramatic speeches, or public arguments. In my experience, it arrives through preparation. Every email saved. Every report documented. Every quiet moment spent paying attention when others assumed you weren't watching. When security escorted me out of that building, everyone thought they were witnessing the end of my story. What they were actually witnessing was the moment the truth started moving in the right direction. I never needed to raise my voice. I never needed to humiliate anyone. The facts did that on their own. And sometimes that's the most satisfying outcome of all. If you've ever stayed silent while people underestimated you, subscribe. Because some stories deserve to be heard all the way to the end, and sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the winning hand.